have the honor, along with Chris Goertzen, of being on the board of directors for University Press, serving as USM's representatives. And for that, I got the honor, Chris and I had the honor first of bringing up the water from my assistant's phone. And secondly, I get the honor of introducing everyone. Andy Wiest said we should wait until the audience outnumbered the presenters, and I think we're almost there. I'm confident we'll have a few others given the amount of interest that was expressed in this panel. So if you will, indulge me in introducing everyone on the panel. At my far right, I have Walter Biggins from University Press. Walter is acquisitions editor. To his left, Craig Gill, executive editor of the University Press. To his left, we have Leila Salisbury, the director of the press. To her left, Cheryl Jenkins with the School of Mass Communication and Journalism. To her left, the famous Chris Goertzen. And to his left, the famous Andy Wiest. And then to my left, Steve Yates, who is marketing director of the University Press. On behalf of the university, we appreciate you all coming down. You've been down a number of times to the university, and we really appreciate it. And with that, I'll turn the panel discussion over to Leila.
All right. Well, again, since we have equal panelists and audience today, our plan had been to have this be really more of a discussion, and we've got a long list of questions, mostly that we from the press are interested in hearing from faculty, librarians, and people associated with the universities about how changes in scholarly communication are affecting them, what kinds of things they need from scholarly publishers or from libraries as things change and how we communicate and disseminate information. So again, feel free, audience, throw in some questions. I'm actually just curious, how many do we have both faculty and librarians in the office or in the audience today? So that's good, because I have on my list of questions for both. So jump in at any time, and also some of these I'm curious for those who have administrative ties. There's some questions that we're interested in hearing about how the changes in scholarly publishing and communication are affecting things such as tenure and that sort of thing. So I'll just jump in, and again, whoever wants to jump in and respond, please do. The first question, geared at faculty, how are electronic publishing projects affecting or influencing your own scholarship? Are new publishing possibilities changing the way you produce or disseminate your work? If the answer is not yet, do you see a time when the situation might change?
All at once.
Yes. How is electronic publishing changing the nature of what you're doing, or is it not yet? Or, you know, I'm happy for anecdotal evidence of colleagues from other departments.
Well, I have a small thing. The first book I published was with University of Chicago Press, and it was rather specific. It was in the subject matter, and I'm not sure how many people were interested, but it was on fiddling on the regular fiddle in Norway, so not the kind that you see in all the pictures and hear in all the tourist advertisements, but the normal fiddle, which has got as many bodies but not as much fame. And that sold for a while, and then it went out of print, and then it came back in as an on-demand with slightly less fidelity but the same words. And so, well,
What do you have for this?
well, there were a lot of music transcriptions, and they were big enough you could still read them, and a few photographs. And I was just glad it came back in. I was glad that there was a place for something that was selling 12 copies a year.
Well, I love that you don't have to wait 3 weeks for an interlibrary loan to get it. I love having it right away. I've been on academia.com or whatever, and oh my gosh, the things that we have access to now. You know, I live on JSTOR anyway, but just having electronic access. And the other thing is all these books that are in the public domain now that you can download and search. You know, for the ebooks and stuff. You can, if you know, the things you can do with scholarly publications now are just unbelievable.
I think I mentioned to you earlier, I guess with our recent book project, it's not necessarily being published electronically, the book is not, but we were asked to provide electronic examples of the content of mass communication and journalism. So we're talking about aspects of media, and the obvious things. You want examples from media. Well, how do you do that if you have a hardback book? Well, you can't really do that. So obviously now they want you to provide some sort of electronic examples to go with the reader. So they're providing a website, but I think eventually what they want to do is to offer the text electronically. And I think, so I guess I have the no, I'm the no not yet, but eventually I think it's going to be important to sort of cater your research in that area, particularly for us who study media. I mean, to me, that would be an obvious marriage for us in that field to look at the technological, the newest ways to present our work and our research in that way, because that's how we're going to have to present that research to students and to scholars in an electronic version, or to give them those examples, news stories and
Well, I
things
just
on the
published an
internet.
article with an online journal for Texto that I'm so excited about, because lots of people get it, not just, the people who, it's an economy too. I know that's your business, but I know you've been real interested in this too. So we're just having it out there so that it comes up on Google, or that in academia.com they track how many times you've been Googled and why.
Right.
And it's fascinating to see. Oh my
Google
gosh,
Scholar,
somebody
that's
read my master's thesis
Yeah.
the other day,
Right.
Whoa. that's really old too.
That's a good point. I noticed that on Google Scholar as well. You can type your name in.
Plus that gives you, I'm going up for a full professor this fall too, so, I have that kind of information, and you live on Google too, so.
I'm all about me some Google.
Yeah. He's the one that turned me on to Google.
I
So.
still worry though that probably we in the academy are a little, in terms of our scholarly publishing, a little behind the curve in sort of adapting to electronic publishing. But
Well, let me do a quick survey since there's not a tremendous amount of us. Who owns a Kindle? Two?
Actually, I have an app for my,
Who owns any ebook reader?
Yeah,
Whether
or
it's-
iPad.
Or the Barnes & Noble Nook, Sony e-reader.
What do you have?
I'm in the field that's probably the least ready to adapt. I mean,
I
history.
heard a panel on that actually this summer. that talked
history
about
just got a telegram.
And to me, holding a book and smelling the glue, the binding, is always the sure sign that you publish something. And being able to go to sleep with it on your face is a sure sign that you publish something. But even that being said, now granted it was a textbook. It wasn't a work of just pure scholarship, but kind of an edited reader I did for a Vietnam class. It has an entire website with documents and films and all kinds of things. But I think what it gets back to is the scholarship. And to this point, I'm going to be other than that in the not yet category. Other than my own research, digitized things and access to materials online, would I consider publishing simply online and not a book? And the answer would be, at this point, no. Partly because I don't think anybody in our field, and probably many of the other fields in our building and perhaps across campus, especially if I'm already tenured, but somebody who is looking forward to having tenure, not having that described in their tenure dossier of, okay, is a online publication a real publication, and if so, how much will it count? Until we, as an academy, come to grips with that exact argument right there, we're going to have a very hard time, shifting over to this new form of publication.
And is that argument happening departmentally, or is it happening across campus right now? I've had some interesting
Most
conversations
departmental.
about that. Yeah.
I'm not even sure some departments have even. I know our department. In our department, it's people standing right outside their offices, talking about it. The department itself hasn't wrestled with this yet, have we? But both also the history department. So I suspect that it's even more fragmented that department's dealing with it. Certainly, the university hasn't dealt with it in a wider sense, at least that I know of.
Only in vague generalities when we redid the tenure and promotion document.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I teach
We
it.
put in a loophole providing flexibility. The standard is a monograph from assistant to associate, and at least a second monograph to full, but we had to acknowledge the changed nature of publishing, and so we left the loophole for something comparable to a monograph.
Okay.
But I don't think that's being thought about much above the department.
And certainly nobody wants to be in the position of arguing that what they publish is comparable and hoping that you agree with
Yeah.
them.
Right.
They want to know that
Exactly.
they're getting it, they're applying for another job.
Yeah, and I
Until we
understand
wrestle
that.
with that, it's going to be difficult.
Well, and I teach in a department that you can get our master's degree 100% online, so we have a very different appreciation for online texts. Because we need to use them in our classrooms, and we can't always depend on the bookstore to get, I mean, I have students sometimes in 17 different states at the same time. So having access to electronic things that I know I can put in their hands right away
Right.
is very different than depending on them to order the books and maybe get them and maybe not. This is one of our students.
I actually think that's a different part of the argument. Assigning stuff that's online or allowing students to get it via Kindle or whatever, I think is a wonderful resource for them. But to make sure that the scholarship is
It's still
as
solid, yeah.
Right.
adjudicated and as accepted, I think is the big step for us as scholars. For access for students, without doubt, this is a better format for them to be able to get to it easily.
Well, and I think the textbook publishers have certainly moved very rapidly in this direction at the, not just at this level, but at the high school and junior high level. I've got a high schooler or two at home who, if you don't have web access, you can't do your homework because that's where it is. And I think that's, if not universal, it's rapidly becoming so.
At the same time, I have a student in interdisciplinary studies who's doing research on rural Mississippi schools, and she was looking at exactly that, and she said that in the schools she surveyed, only 25% of the children have web access.
Right.
So there has to be, I think, having both, maybe as Chris was saying, with the on-demand option, plus also electronic option.
Yeah.
would be-
Well, and in terms of numbers, just to put this in context, because I'm the one who brought up Kindle, because we're always curious to see
Who's actually using it?
Right, who's actually using it, other than my wife, who, by the way, is the worst kind of Kindle user, because she'll just read as much free stuff as she can. Maybe the best kind.
This is why publishers have financial problems.
This is
No,
one.
that's the hard thing.
You know, we
Think about you guys every time I download something.
well, literally, we have a trip planned at the end of this year, and so Liz has just gone and looked at one travel book after another, but only as much of the free material as she can for each one. But in the aggregate, she's looked at 20 different books and gotten a lot of great information, all for free. I'm not sure how Amazon feels about that. I know how the publishers feel about that. But we were talking on the drive down, the electronic and print-on-demand combined are still only around 10% of our business. And of that 10%, the majority of that is actually print-on-demand. I think electronic is still just like 3%, 2 or 3%. So as much as we think about this and as much focus as there is on this new technology, because we can all see it sort of looming out there, the practical matter in terms of where's the money coming from or where are the sales being generated is still very much the traditional book. And then, of course, the big question becomes, will ebooks or other kinds of electronic publishing supplement or replace the traditional book?
My wife is in the process of reviewing a book where the author has used electronic means due to sheer greed, I think. I mean, of a scholarly sort. That it's an enormous book on Fanny Hensel Mendelssohn, Felix's sister, who's also a wonderful composer, but under certain societal constraints, so couldn't be public about it. And he's written this thick thing that's sort of in between a narrative and an encyclopedia, but then there's lots of music and a website that accompanies the book. And I bet there are going to be more and more books like that. I mean, both the scores and the sounds are online. My worry there is that the physical book might last longer than the inclination to keep up the website, or at any rate, they might be part of it for one reason or another.
I was going to, great point on his part, because I was going to ask something very similar. There's a book I'm completing now, like every other book I've ever done. Probably maybe 1/3 of my research actually shows up in a book, and there's 2/3 that are on the floor, or maybe another piece I'll think about getting to one day or other. And it struck me that it'd be great to have a companion website to the book where you can only have so many appendices before the publisher goes crazy and says, no, you can't have 700 pages, it's got to be 200 pages. And perhaps a website that would link the publishable research to other things that would add more depth to it, and perhaps sometimes something as similar as photographs, as simple as photographs. There's hundreds of photographs I have, and you guys only like to publish like 10 because it costs so much money.
Right, right.
So is that perhaps a way forward
I
to
know
link
that-
the two, paper and
We have had authors do that in a limited sense, where they've created a website specifically either for the author or for the book that provides additional context of that sort of thing. And it's certainly going to be something that I think, as younger scholars enter the realm, that's going to be a much more attractive thing for them to do. One of the things that we've been talking about, and I don't have an answer to this, is that as books become more ebooks, the possibilities of, if you're doing a work of music scholarship, of including not just the music notation, but actual samples of the music in ebook form, or presenting video or things like that, becomes possible. That is supplemental to your research, as more than a footnote, actually having samples of the work. So these are things that we're thinking about for sure. I mean, we have to be. We don't have a firm answer to that. But certainly with the website thing, I think that's already starting to happen.
One interesting thing that our scholars are doing is using the web log, because now they're almost indistinguishable. If you sign up on WordPress, you can make something that looks every bit like a website, add photos and video, etc.
Free.
What I find happening, this is happening with the author who wrote Music Mafia, but it also especially happened with Ivor Miller, who wrote about Afro-Cuban influences. A book is a part of a discussion, and he uses that web log to continue the discussion even beyond what the book was, and then people interact with him on the web log. It's quite fascinating. It's like having a nonstop running appendices at the back of the book, and it just keeps going and going so long as he's willing to maintain it. It's very interesting.
That's kind of what's happening in academia.com too, that people who are related in interest find each other. This one guy, we've been doing parallel things for the last 20 years. We didn't know about each other at all, and he was on there, and he'd written a paper that I found, and I actually said thank you, and we had this really informative discussion about how our research works together and how we support each other. Some people think we're crazy, and we're not. So that was very affirmative to have, like you said, that instant conversation. And the same thing happened with a book that came out from University of Texas Press that I do. The guy's first book, well, he's written a bunch of books, but this one book I'd used for 20 years, he put out a new book, and they put the old one on as a PDF, and you could download it. And a concordance, it's a series of Nahuatl songs with transcription and translation and notes and everything. And I was too cheap to buy it for the $200 it costs now, and so I would get it from the library, and sometimes it would come in, sometimes I always was running up fines. So I should have just bought the book, but when they put it on there, the first thing I did was email him. I never contacted him before, and said thank you for this, and then emailed the editor and said thank you for this, and they said, well, this is what we're trying, and it has a beautiful website, a place where you can get a hold of him, a place where you can get a hold of them, and all the materials I could ever imagine. And it's cool.
Another thing that's happening, Andy, and I'm finding this out, I've got a writer working on a dual biography of two children's authors, Crockett Johnson and Ruth Krause, and he actually set up a website in advance asking for information, anyone who are children's literature scholars or things like that. So the conversation that he's having on that website and the attachments and info that he's getting is actually shaping the final product of the book.
Great idea, so you don't get that review that says, it was great, except you
Yeah, except you didn't do this,
Great idea.
Not to mention that he's already building up his own.
Yeah, he's already building up an
His
audience.
marketing director would love it.
Well, and that sort of leads into one of the things that I wanted to throw out there. My sense is this kind of electronic conversation is changing how scholarship is done, whether it changes the book beforehand or the book then occasions some sort of discussion afterwards. And in a panel meeting where I was this summer, they were talking about the concept of social reading and the possibilities of authors that, the print book is not necessarily the final book anymore, and then is informed by some discussion that starts happening after this is published. So, in my publisher hat, I think, okay, okay, then what version of this book project is the final book? You know, and question for libraries, how do you deal, or will you deal with electronic content where, what is the version of record? It may be unclear, you know, where that stops. Is anyone talking about that sort of thing? Or do libraries have a plan for how to handle
This whole issue has been, for us, at least 10, 15 years, looking at changing formats, and one constant is change in libraries and formats. And I'm a media cataloger, so starting off with VHS, moving into DVD, and now into all kinds of manifestations of the DVD. So that's why you put a lot of notes in your catalog record and to inform the user just what all the bells and whistles are of this particular item. And if we're describing it, the surrogate is the description of the item itself, and it leads you to the appropriate material with certain expectations. Along with that is the expectation that you have the equipment to read it, that you'll be able to, you have a DVD, that you'll be able to use it. Your PC has those kind of equipment. You used to talk about Kindle. Without the Kindle, you don't have, you're not able to use that format. And then there's a couple of those Kindle types that are out there. Which one is going to, because if you remember beta, VHS, and now DVD, so you have to at some point move into a standard. And so this is the constant changing that goes with the electronic environment. There are certain disciplines that have embraced electronic publication. Certainly the science technology has embraced this internationally. It's the humanities that are more reluctant because they're book-driven rather than article-driven. And so that's where you're going to see that shift or difference in the disciplines. And I'm just now kind of getting up to speed on that. But when you're talking to the scientists, they've been doing this for a number of years. But because that exposure electronically reaches more people, and there's more discussion, and so it's more dynamic. And so you find, like you were saying, you know, all these other people that are interested in the same thing that you're interested in because it's more out there. So the impact, and I don't know how to measure this, that publication impact that needs to be measured of some kind of matrix to figure that out. But that would also tell you, and it would also impress faculty to publish more. But that takes time to see that kind of result.
Well, it's also interesting that there's this ongoing and potentially never-ending fight in the science and technology fields over open access and over who's paying for what, because you have such a strong presence of commercial publishers who are driven by a slightly different motive. We have to make enough money to stay in business, but we are a not-for-profit business. If we're talking about, are we allowed to name names? If you're talking about,
go ahead.
Will be broadcast.
if you're talking about certain large European companies that control a huge chunk of the market for traditional journals, and I guess they're now trying to control access online as well. And then there's rebellion against that via other OA, open access, and other kinds of things. And that fight hasn't really moved into the humanities yet either. And it may not, because again, it's a different sort of thing. But I do think, starting with the journals, with the humanities journals, with the various quarterlies and literary journals and other kinds of things, there's at least a decade's worth of turmoil potentially ahead of us on that side.